healthcare business podcast from the Coker Group that focuses on solutions to help healthcare organizations effectively navigate the changing healthcare industry landscape.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Coffee with Coker. My name is Mark Reiboldt. I'm the host. Today's episode, we have some guests that we've had on before. We are talking about solving the compensation conundrum. We're talking with Matt BonDurant and Jack Liu, both from ProCare Portal. And we've had Matt and Jack on before. We've talked about ProCare Portal before on past episodes, and we'll make sure those episodes are linked in the notes to this episode. What ProCare does is a automation tool, software solution to help hospitals, health systems, and groups manage their physician and provider compensation. So there's a lot there that goes along with that. Really, what we're talking about is why, or kind of continuing the discussion around why automating the compensation management process is important and why it's becoming more and more of interest for hospitals and health systems out there. We've seen a tremendous amount of positive reception and growth from what ProCare has been doing just in the last year, 2 years. And that's why we want to keep talking about it, because we know of all the work Coker does in the realm of physician and provider compensation. This is something that is making a big difference for hospitals and health systems managing in many cases, very broad range of models. And within each model, there are many different elements that go into those. So when you're talking about manually managing something like that, the burden is very challenging and in many cases, very risky from a compliance perspective. So we talk a little bit about that in this episode. We talk about kind of why is this continuing to be more relevant and helping hospitals and health systems and groups understand what are some of the key things that they need to consider when they're thinking about whether or not they should look at automating the management of their compensation models. So again, it was a good conversation. We are doing these episodes right now remotely, so if some of the audio is a little choppy in there, we apologize for that. That's just one of those things that could not be avoided, as we're having to do a few of these episodes remotely until things get back a little bit to normal after the COVID-19 pandemic hopefully continues to become more manageable here. So we thank you guys for listening. We always encourage you guys to reach out to us. If you have questions, you can always find us at coffeewithcoker.com. You can find all of our episodes there and as well as all the other supporting information that go along with them. So thanks for listening and enjoy this conversation with Matt and Jack on solving the compensation conundrum. All right, well, welcome back to the podcast. We have Jack Liu and Matt BonDurant from ProCare Portal. So welcome, Matt and Jack.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be back here.
Absolutely. And we're once again talking about a topic that we've covered a few times on the podcast, and it definitely continues to come up. We're seeing more and more discussion out there in the marketplace and more interest in what ProCare does and their solution, their solution has brought to the market. So it's very relevant. But what we're talking about is the compensation automation process, and specifically tools and solutions and different approaches that are out there to kind of address compensation through technology, compensation management, and everything that goes along with that. So to get us started, guys, and Jack, Matt, you guys just jump in here, but I figured we could just kind of kick this off and pick up a little bit, probably where we left off on past conversations. But, as we think about the relevance of automating the management of compensation, particularly for a hospital or health system that is dealing with more and more challenges and scale when it comes to managing physician comp or provider comp. Talk about just kind of why this is important to think about automation as it relates to strategy and alignment, and kind of where does automation fit in this whole dynamic going on right now?
Sure, I can kick us off here. So as it pertains to physician integration and alignment, it's important because in today's healthcare climate, as we all know, it's becoming increasingly difficult to stay competitive. And, that's one major factor or one major driver for alignment. But then the space that we play in, value-based space, we like to see it as kind of a overall industry-wide kind of initiative to reduce healthcare costs while increasing quality of care. And so that's the other side of it. And now the question is, how do we do that operationally and strategically?
That's right. So when we think about some of those things, when we're thinking about strategy and operations, since you mentioned that, what are some of the gaps you think that are out there that can kind of hold this up?
Well, so there is this compensation conundrum, as we like to call it, where you see a lot of health systems and hospitals that are dabbling in a lot of value-based kind of alternative payment methodologies, but it's difficult to actually implement, and it's even more difficult for the upkeep and the operational burden that comes with it. And so you kind of have these kind of inverse forces at play with each other. The more advanced your strategy is, you're putting potentially more strain and squeeze on your organization operationally. So a lot of times we see lackluster, compensation models and plans really due to this fact. And so therein lies the need for new technology.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I know we see regularly working with hospitals is the conundrum can be, like you said, it can be they have their model and they're trying to manage it operationally, or they're trying to manage something operationally that they really haven't put the strategy into. And you kind of need to take a step back or a few steps back and address that. I think one of the things that's interesting here is the strategy and design of the models and the systems is correlated with the managing of it, the implementation and managing over time. But it's critical in that the more complex you get, and no big surprise here, the harder it is to manage those things. And not only is it difficult to manage them, but to scale them. And I think from my point of view, that's where automation comes in, because if you have something, like you said, Jack, when you're dealing with much more dynamic payment and reimbursement models, that's kind of trickles down to a greater level of complexity and compensation models, because it's not just production base. It's not just RVUs times a rate, and that's the formula. That may be it, but there's typically what we're seeing is much more dynamic than that. So you got incentives that have to be managed. You have benefits. You have different inputs for different types of services, whether it's a medical directorship or it's straight production or it's co-management, those types of things. And then, of course, you get into the complexity when you start getting down deeper and deeper into different specialties, different types of services and procedures that are being provided, and of course, different levels of providers themselves, et cetera. So the complexity just continues to grow, which, it just compounds that foundational challenge of correlating the balance in strategy and operations. And
we're seeing a lot of this, Mark. Just comparing it to last year, this year, we're seeing a lot more of these complexities that you mentioned, at risk, contracts, team collaboration. If the clients haven't currently implemented those models, they're dabbling in it now, modeling and doing some analysis and evaluation of those plans, models, and metrics.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And the data is coming from all over the place. And you mentioned this, Mark, all the different areas. We're working with groups, and we come in and we've got data that's coming from, straight operations folks. So at the practice level, we've got data coming from obviously the source systems, but there's all these other in betweens, and we see all these departments that are working to try to get data that applies to compensation pulled together, all different timings. Nothing's really joined together. And then at the end of that, what it means is we're asking the docs to do a bunch of stuff. We're paying them completely different because none of those things talk to each other. And that becomes the gap that we see is all this data, all these things we try to get in front of docs, all these dashboards that they might have access to, all that comes together and it doesn't really equal up what we actually incentivize them for. And so that's the gap we see is we ask them to do things that we don't really reimburse them for.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, which kind of begs another question that I thought it'd be good to discuss, which is, what are some of the opportunity costs of compensation management? Meaning, what are some of the other factors that go into this overall perspective?
Well, the big one, Mark, I think is, a lot of these hospital and health system admins, they're so mired down in the process of managing comp, doesn't leave much, time and focus to strategy. And that's a commonplace across a lot of our clients.
Yeah.
And so the idea is to automate their current state processes first. And by doing that, implementing all of their models in a compensation management system, being able to automate the data maintenance tasks, the compensation calculation, the outputs, and any current manual business process, then that allows them to free up their time and focus into doing more strategizing and optimization of the plans.
Yeah. And also, and this is kind of a positive byproduct, I would think, but we deal a lot with, or a lot of what we are doing as it relates to compensation and other things is kind of on the back end of it, which is compliance. And so when you think about the data and the validation, the strategy processes that have been put in there, it's only going to further support what needs to be there when it comes to compliance, because it's not just getting, a fair market value and commercially reasonableness opinion on every comp model every couple of years, but it is this kind of ongoing dynamic maintenance exercise or resource there that only further validates, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing that, and the amount, the others pieces that comes up really in every client that we've worked in is the data validation, where what they thought was happening isn't necessarily what's occurring, and that just goes to the overload of data, the overload of processing, and we end up with a lot of errors and a lot of miscalculations, and those put us in a big opportunity cost side too to get those under control, and so to have something where we have pure validation checks to be able to go through and validate numbers and then get that validated numbers to the provider. We're getting data in front of them, and then data changes. That obviously creates bad relationships, and then so when we can take that away and we can just focus on the models and the focus on the things that the providers want to talk about and the ways they want to be paid, and that also happens to align exactly with the way we need to go with the business, then we all go at it in one direction. And I think the opportunity cost now is that that's not the case. So we're constantly fighting these relationships and these past problems we've had with data in order to get everybody to be on one team.
Yeah. And the other thing I think about is helping with the balance between overly complex models and in other cases, kind of the other end of that extreme, which is overly simplified models. And we see literally everything that runs the gambit across the board of, some models are just so simple that it works against them. Others, there's so much complexity there that there's a lot that goes into managing them, and then ultimately being able to validate them and report on them and maybe defend them from a compliance standpoint. So having a system or a tool, a resource in place that can help manage that balance, I think, is important. As we go on, talk to us a little bit, and I've heard you guys talk about this before, but I know there's some key things that go into kind of what makes an effective compensation plan or different models really drive results in an organization or really bring value to the organization, which of course means value to not just the organization as a whole, but you got to think about the provider, the clinicians there that are involved, and then the kind of the overall operations and strategy of whatever organization they're contributing to. So talk about some of those things that factor into driving value and results.
Yeah, so I don't think we will ever, completely get away from a productivity model, obviously. So, first and foremost, I think a productivity model in place that doesn't encourage overutilization is important. And then more and more so, as I said earlier, we're seeing more kind of risk-based kind of contracts, and these may come in various different forms. Clawbacks, as an example, true ups on a periodic basis, and then beyond that, you really valuing the physician's time for all the tasks that she or he performs. And as Matt stated, that's although a logical approach, but oftentimes we see organizations miss the mark on that, and that can be for managing APPs, for citizenship tasks, etc.
That's right. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, we see that the effective models are not oversimplifying things. So I think if you come in and say, hey, we're going to put everyone on an RVU model, and it's going to give everything that we want. Well, it's not, because again, that same conundrum that we talked about, operationally, we're going to ask them to do a lot more than just produce RVUs, and then the alignment's not going to be there. And so when we can come in, we can say, hey, you're going to have an individual component on RVUs. You're also going to have a team component on RVUs, and you can drive that team however it makes sense for your business objectives. That could be getting two groups to collaborate or work together, or two, a specialty that is now working with each other that used to compete, and we can drive those things together. And by putting that team incentive in place, which is now fully automated, so it's not a difficult thing to calculate, but now you've got that in place, and so that you're starting to have that dialogue open up where these groups are starting to work together, and they can find ways to improve those measures, and that's happening organically from your strategy of how you set up that model, and now that we have that capability to just plug those things in, we can keep extending that out even further into the quality realm and things of that nature. So I think when we start to open that up and really say, what do we ask these providers to do, and how can we pay them for them? And then that's something that we can set up and manage quite easily with automation. Then you find a model that's fully robust and speaks to your physicians, and starts to ask them to do things and compensate them to do things that without that incentive, that likely wouldn't occur.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that makes a lot of sense, and again, I think this is just an illustration of the ways that these processes are becoming, in many ways, more and more challenging to manage, but they don't have to be. They don't have to be this manual, labor-intensive, high overhead cost type function. I mean, there really are, just like with many other ways that we've optimized processes and operations with health systems. I think this is a great example of something that there's a great solution out there, and there are different layers to it that I think drive value. Again, we're not just talking about managing compensation at a very basic level. We're talking about all the elements of it, from strategy and design all the way through the back end and compliance and validation. So also the value of the data and the analytics that are there that Jack, you talked about. I think, as we're recording this, we're right in the midst of, I guess, what I would say is probably the depths of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic here in the States, for sure. And I was just curious if you guys had heard anything. I mean, there's all kinds of discussion going on out there right now, but it didn't take long for the country to really dive into or really kind of start embracing telehealth. And I thought that was a good example of, okay, this is something, telehealth, telemedicine, we've been talking about for years. Something like this occurs, and all of a sudden everybody's on board with it, which I think is a very good thing. But I think it's another example of, okay, what do we do though with telehealth from a management perspective? There's technology out there that allows for telehealth to be very simple, frankly. But what about billing for telehealth? What about compensating your providers for the services rendered via telehealth and those types of things? Have y'all heard any of that discussion, just anecdotally at this point?
We haven't come across too many systems that have a telehealth practice or component. But, certainly, what you say is true, Mark, that we've seen, more and more so health organizations, by whatever means, acquisition and going out, creating this telehealth business. And it just goes to support the current climate is, it's another disruption. It's, either disrupt or be disrupted.
Right. So,
yeah, a lot of these, we've seen the big headlines with these acquisitions and M&A deals with Amazon and CVS and, Aetna. Everybody is teaming up. And so, much in the same way, hospitals and health systems are doing the same thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And this is part of that, I feel like. And it's going to be more and more prevalent, for sure, as we go into the future. And, although Matt and I haven't encountered too much of this, but we have certainly given it some thought. And so it is something, I think, to be determined from a comp standpoint. We're not really sure how to treat that. So this reminds me of a past inquiry from a potential client that came across doing essentially, I don't recall, Matt, if it was telehealth or I think it was something along the lines of concierge medicine.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. And I mean, it's almost on a transactional basis that they were paying, all of their providers. I think whatever the case may be, when designing a comp plan or compensation model, you have to foster all of those goals of the organization. Right. Yeah. And, to bring it, full circle back to alignment between, the physicians, the health system and even the payer.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think the thing that strikes me as interesting is just simply that whatever it is that gets thrown at you, maybe it is a new transaction, maybe it's some sort of new partnership arrangement or new payment model, whatever, or maybe it's something like this, that we're seeing now with a very unexpected event is driving the embracement of a relatively new care delivery model, such as telehealth. The point is you got to have a way to pay for it, and you got to have a mechanism to manage that. It's one thing if you're going to go in and try to do that manually, and you're going to try to ramp up telehealth services and just kind of hope you're on top of the billing elements as well as the payment, the compensation elements that come along with that. Or you can have a solution that allows you to go ahead and set that up. And then it's just like any other compensation model, right? I mean, you pay for the value of the service and based on the demand in the market. And what we're talking about is just kind of managing that in a very efficient way. So I think it can kind of apply to anything.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's what we see, and that's the progression that we've had with our clients is hey, this is something that you can control. You can add in new models. We can factor in something like telemedicine and incentivize for that in a different way for very quickly within the platform, and get you those analytics and be able to set up those models and tie it back to revenue and RVUs and push that out and say, hey, this is the new way we're going to be doing this. Incentivize the docs to get on board with it and tie it back to their revenue and make sure you're not going to sink the boat from a revenue perspective. So yeah, those are all things that you can do today without a major services overhaul or customized technology. So that's definitely the cool part about bringing in an automation tool that's got flexibility.
Yeah, well, I think it just goes to show the nature of the dynamic world we're living in, and right now it's kind of on hyper mode as far as what's going on in the healthcare world, or the country as a whole. But yeah, again, I just think that's something that would be helpful for people to keep in mind as they're thinking about these kind of other layers, other elements that go along with. It's not just telehealth. It's not just work RVUs. It's those and a lot of different things that go into all of this, and staying on top of it is getting more and more challenging. But there are solutions, so that's good.
Yeah, no, we've seen some really complex stuff come through that, where we've got contracts that are being spanned over periods of time. So everybody's got different contract dates, and docs coming in, providers coming in mid-month, and things of that nature. And so be able to toggle those calculations on with and turn on proration with a click of a button and get that kind of data out and automate those compensation models from without having to pull out of a system and do a bunch of work manually and try to feed it back in. And that's been the value to the automation process that allows us to do these things that you talk about and do it seamlessly and quickly. So it's been a lot of fun.
Well, I definitely, I know this is going to be something we're continue to see more of and talk, and from our standpoint, continue to talk about, because again, this is one of those things that it's not like it's not one of those types of technologies you're like, oh, it's here, you have to embrace it. This is one of those things we're seeing people happily embrace it because it truly is kind of that perspective of value add as opposed to necessary evil. Let's just put it that way. So I always like those types of things, as we all do. But I think that's also why we're continuing to talk about it, and we'll continue to see more of this in the future. So as always, I thank y'all for your contribution and being willing to have these discussions. And we'll look forward to having another one here very soon.
Thanks very much, Mark.
Sounds great. Thanks for having us, Mark.
We hope you enjoyed that episode of Coffee with Coker, and we thank you for listening. We want to encourage all of our listeners to participate and contribute in the podcast. So if you have any questions on any of the things we discussed in this episode, any of the topics that were presented, please feel free to ask us. Also, we welcome your feedback and suggestions. If you have any ideas related to the material we discussed in this episode, or in any episode, please let us know and we'll make sure to incorporate it. And if you have ideas for topics you'd like to hear more information about, about in future episodes. Please send those suggestions to us. We would love to hear them, and we'd love to incorporate them into our future episodes. You can find us online and on social media. Start with our website, and specifically the podcast is coffeewithcoker.com. You can also find that through the main Coker website at cokergroup.com. You can also find us on social media, Twitter at Coker Group, and then on LinkedIn, you can search for Coker Group and find our page and the page for some of our team members as well there. So you can find us and reach out to us a number of places. And then if you want to contact us directly, one of the best ways to do that, email feedback@cokergroup.com. That's feedback@cokergroup.com. And again, we'd love to get your feedback, and we'd love to encourage everyone to subscribe to the podcast so that you can be notified when future episodes are released. We look forward to the next episode, and we look forward to getting your suggestions and feedback on this episode. Thanks for listening, and we look forward to speaking with you again on future episodes.